Today we're going to take apart an iPad 2 for lens removal. This is an iPad that came in with a pretty bad spiderweb crack. That's usually how they show up. A lot of people talk about trying to get the glass off in one piece, and it becomes very challenging because I don't see any iPads that have just one or two scratches. In any case, we'll start with our template here. So we're going to mark off the areas that you have to take special or pay special attention to here when you're prying the lens off. You don't want to damage any of the components, and this is exactly where they're located. So if you can, you probably want to mark these off on the device that you're working with. If you don't have a template, you can kind of use this as a guideline. It's pretty easy to eyeball this and see where these are located. Right behind the volume buttons, down on the bottom on the right hand side of the home button, you'll have your Wi-Fi module. And then of course you want to be careful around the camera. This isn't critical. It's not real easy to do damage to that area, but just be aware that it's there. Mainly the volume control buttons, flex cable, and the Wi-Fi module are what you're going to have to watch out for. So get a lot of pry tools together. You're going to need these for this project. You're also going to, of course, want to have your safety glasses. Don't want to get glass in your eyes. Trust me, from what I've seen, it doesn't look fun. So down here at the bottom, you have your Wi-Fi control, you have your volume button controls over here, and there's flex cables. Very unusual design that Apple used. On the back, if you had the 3G module, this is where they would be located. On this one, we don't have 3G. This is a Wi-Fi version of the iPad 2. But in any case, we're going to start with some heat down here. On the right-hand side is where I usually like to go in because the flex cable for the lens is located on the left-hand side of the device. So make sure you use quite a bit of heat here, not directly on the LCD, but right on this white or black border that goes around the perimeter. I'm going to heat this up pretty well to the point where it's pretty warm to the touch. This will make your life a lot easier if you have lots of heat here, because this thing just doesn't like to come off in one piece. So on this one, I thought I might be able to get in with a thin pry tool, and it did not work. I tried a couple different variations here, and you'll often run into this. It's a very precise fit around the edge. So you've got to get in between the plastic bezel that sits between the lens and the frame of the iPad. And again, you can see here I'm not getting in with the pry tool, so I'm going to go to a much thinner surface in a second here. I'm going to go ahead and you'll see me throughout the video apply heat at regular intervals. You want to make sure you keep this thing warm. Take my word for this, otherwise your life will be very frustrating. So between the plastic bezel and the lens, you'll see on the just on the outside of the lens there's a piece of plastic, and we don't want to damage that plastic either if it's not too beat up already. We can replace it if we need to, but a lot of times you'll get one in where the corners are good and you don't have to worry about it. But what you have to do is get underneath the glass and the adhesive that is bonding to the frame. And if you can actually get under the adhesive, sometimes you can get this stuff to stick together, but in a minute here you'll be able to see how badly shattered this one is, and it's really tough to get this off in one piece. I think if you can see right here, light's kind of bright there, but it's spiderwebbed all the way out to the edges, so good luck trying to get off one piece. It's all just falling apart. So what we're going to do is get as much of this at one time as we can, and this is kind of a good example if you run into this situation where it's badly shattered. If you have a solid piece, it's not too hard to work with, but otherwise you're going to need a flat surface that's going to get underneath this all the way and kind of take as much of it with you as you can. So the razor blade kind of works to get it started. And then from that point, we're going to insert a number of pry tools as we progress along the outside, because if you don't, it will sit back down and the adhesive will get stuck again. So we need to have something in between the lens and the frame to just kind of keep up with us as we're prying, as a buffer between the two so they don't stick back together. So I'm not going to bore you with too much of this. I just want to point out a couple of things. One, you'll see me touching the surface where the LCD is. I am not applying pressure to this in any way whatsoever. What I'm doing is just kind of stabilizing the iPad as I'm prying on it. You can see I've got under some of the big chunks here at the bottom with one piece. What you want to do is try to make sure you don't go between them, because when they start splitting, it just gets really messy. So again, don't put any pressure on the LCD, and don't pry in a way that it's going to make the glass put pressure on the LCD either. So this is kind of as bad as it gets right here when it's really shattered like that. And I mean, I've seen it a little bit worse, but trying to get under all the stuff at one time, it's really tricky. I'm not going to show you. I will cut to the next part here shortly, and you can skip ahead a little bit if you want. But if you want to watch this in real time for a minute, it is really just a matter of patience, liberal heat, and having a lot of pry tools here. And we're gonna pry the area that's clear right now until we get up to the places that we have marked off that you have to be really careful about. You can see I was fortunate enough that this one had a lens protector on it, so that's keeping a lot of the glass from moving around. If I didn't have that lens protector, obviously I would have taped this all off so we don't have too many shards of glass flying around. And again, just kind of be careful here. Make sure you have your safety glasses on. A lot of times you're going to end up with glass in your hands. It's kind of comes with the territory. But again, applying some heat here, and I think we're just about done with this segment here. In a minute, it's going to skip to the part where we proceed with caution. So I do encourage you to watch this entire video. There's a lot of stuff here that, well, you can learn from experience, but experience comes with risk. So I don't spend too much time on this part here. I think we're just about through. But the more information you have, the better. Okay, so you can see I've worked along the edge here, and I have my pry tools holding the lens away from the frame. And now we're going to get to the fun part. This is where you have to be really, really careful. Apple did a couple things that were kind of funny on this device, and they've changed some of it since then. Underneath the volume control cables here, there's a couple of flex cables that are actually attached to the lens with adhesive. I can't think of any reason why you would want to do that. And they actually routed it, one of these cables underneath the frame, so it's kind of like they said, yeah, this is a dumb idea if you ever want to take it off, or maybe there was some other reason that they did it. But the trick here is that we have to go underneath the lens and not cut a couple of flex cables that are literally flush with the lens, and they're also stuck to the lens with adhesive, so this gets really tricky. And what I like to do is just kind of go around both sides of where we're going to be working, where the danger zone is going to be, and pull this up just a little bit. You don't want to pull really hard because you can just tear those cables really easily. And it's actually two different cables. One you can snag with your pry tool, and the other one actually sticks to the lens, and just pressure will tear it off. So you'll see them when I get this thing taken apart. And I'm not too concerned about the area around the camera. I mean, obviously you don't want to pry in too deep, especially if you're using a blade. But just being conscious of where it's at, we can kind of work up to that point. There's not a lot of adhesive where the camera is either, so it makes our life a little bit easier. So here I'm just working with this, kind of loosening things up on either side of this area that I've marked off. And what we're going to try to do is look down inside here so we can actually see the flex cables. You may not be able to see them in the video, but as you work on this device and you just pry this thing out a little bit at a time with a very, very shallow pry, you should be able to look down between the lens and the frame and actually see. You might need magnification and definitely some good lighting, but you can actually see the cables in here. And just make sure you get on top of them so they don't stick to anything and you don't slice through them. This cable in particular, if you know, on the bottom, if you break the Wi-Fi, it's not too tough to replace. This right here is your power button and your volumes and your hold button all together in one flex cable. So if you cut this, you're going to have quite a bit of work. And on probably one of my upcoming videos, I'll actually have a replacement of that volume flex cable, and it's quite tedious to say the least. So be really careful here. Take your time. Just pry things a little bit at a time. This is kind of where the skill part, it's literally the hardest part of this job, is separating this lens without doing any damage to these cables. If you can do that here and do the part on the Wi-Fi, then the rest isn't too tough. Okay, so you can see when the glass starts to split as I'm prying down, and instead of getting under it, I start going over the top of a piece. That's usually when I'll bring in the blade if I have to. This one looks like it actually cooperated, so I'm just very, very slowly pulling on this and applying heat at the same time to keep the adhesive nice and pliable, and just going very slowly. If you force it, if you use jerky movements, or you don't heat up the adhesive enough, you're gonna tear these cables. So be very careful. And once you get this thing off, the installation isn't too tough, with a couple of minor complications that come up as far as routing the flex cable back into the device. So you can see this is probably not visible on video, but inside here, once we get this thing off, you'll see the flex cables that I'm talking about. And I'm actually looking at them right now so I can see exactly where they are and what my progress is as far as prying the lens away from the frame and the cables at the same time. And it looks like I've gotten under it pretty much at this point. So I've probably cleared the dangerous spots. And from here we can proceed down the side. So now we're going to work on the bottom corner where the Wi-Fi module is. Now this one's a little tricky. Again, not as expensive to replace, but for nothing else more than the challenge, we're going to try to get this off. And usually you will be successful. It's just a matter of being able to see where this thing is. It's pretty wide. It's almost takes up the entire border on the bottom of the iPad, and it isn't a very strong component, but they actually adhesived this little ribbon cable. I mean, it's probably about 2.5 inches long, to the lens itself, maybe 3/4 of an inch wide or an inch wide, and it is stuck underneath here. You'll see in a minute when we get this thing taken apart. So as you're going around this bottom right hand corner, you want to really take a look inside. And this one actually split right. You can see the glass crack there, like right about at the point where the flex cable starts. So I had to be really careful here. And I'm actually taking a look inside and using the blade to get underneath that cable. If you can't see that cable, then obviously don't stick your blade inside of the device. You want to make sure you can actually visually identify where the cable is and get underneath it. If not, then I would apply some more heat and maybe use a pretty thin pry tool and you don't have to worry as much about the outside. But if you were to start getting, if you get the Wi-Fi cable stuck to the lens, you go underneath it. When you get close to the home button, you can actually slice through it. That's where it goes through, or where it connects to the board. So you can start on either end, but I like to start from the outside and work my way in on this one. So once you've gotten under these two areas sufficiently and you've kind of got something, you can see I've got the pry tool there between the part of the flex that I don't want to cut and the lens, and then on the side, of course, I've got some spacers there to hold the volume cables away from the lens. We can just go ahead and start working on the rest of the top and bottom. And I had a couple splits here too where the glass is cracking, so the main thing is you want to try to take all the glass at once and not just pry on one part and put pressure on it so that it breaks more. And I got lucky on this one. You're going to run into some that might be shattered badly at the bottom, some might be at the top. On this one, well, this one is the right-hand side, but it can really be anywhere or all of the above. And that's where you end up spending a lot of time removing the lens and trying not to cut yourself. So here you don't have to dig in too far where the camera is. There's not really too much adhesive there. And I had another part starting to split here, I believe is why I took the blade again. And then, of course, we're going to warm up down here on the bottom. So you're going to be opening this up from right to left. But we want to make sure there's nothing bonded down at the bottom because my goal here is to get this all off on one piece. This wasn't too badly broken all the way through. But you have to heat up this bottom part or you're going to have resistance. Then you'll end up lifting up on the right-hand side, and you can always crack the center. And if it does and hits the LCD, then you're in for a lot less fun. And at the very least, it just makes it a lot messier. So we want to try to get this thing to release all the way around at once, top and bottom, and on the left-hand side. So I'm just very slowly prying here and applying heat as I go along. And it looks like one of my pry tools actually fell off inside. Obviously, we want to avoid that whenever possible. I think I might have turned it the wrong direction or something. So as soon as we open it up, we'll move that off of the LCD. But I'm just going to continue, and you can see it broke a little bit there. Left some of the glass behind, so we'll have to go back and clean this up. And that's just about it. All we have to do now is take out the LCD, remove the lens, and then prep it for the new lens. So there's an image coming up here in a minute where you can see where all the important parts that you have to watch out for are going to be. So just look at the white arrows when they come up. Pause the video if you need to. And you can see everything's intact. We didn't damage any of these cables that we were so concerned about. So now in order to release, here's the image that I was talking about. On the left-hand side, if you have the 3G module version, that's where the modules will be located. So now we have to salvage a couple of things from the old lens. You can do this before or after you remove it from the iPad. Doesn't really matter. I have this open, so I'm going to go ahead and do it now. So just take your heat gun, apply some heat to where the home button and the camera are located on the lens. And we've got a couple of metal pieces we take off, and then the home button. Just set those aside until you get ready to put your new lens into the iPad. And of course, take note as to how these are positioned. You can see you got your home button clicker right there, and there's a little band underneath the home button that you can kind of get underneath. That'll pop right out there. And so you can see how that faces the front, and that's what activates your home button when you press down. And then you've got this little camera. I honestly don't even know what this is called, but it goes right over the front of the camera. And now we're just going to have 4 screws holding the LCD into place. Do not lose these screws. As with most Apple components, they are unique, and you'll probably have a difficult time finding new ones if you end up losing these. And make sure you don't take out the wrong screws. If you look carefully at the frame, you can see what actually holds the LCD into place. And there are a couple screws that are close by that it's easy to kind of get confused with. So make sure you know what you're taking out, set those aside. And then we will lift up the LCD, which has a flex cable with a little bit of adhesive that you'll have to kind of pull away from the frame, but don't pull too hard, and make sure you disconnect the main flex cable from the LCD before you pull on anything. Okay, so we have our 4th screw right here, and then we're just going to go underneath the right hand side. There's a pretty big cavity here you can just kind of lift up on, and you shouldn't have any resistance here. And what we'll go ahead and do is unplug the LCD from the motherboard. And there's a little gate that kind of swings from the right hand side to the left. It's more of a wire actually, but it acts as a gate. And you can't really get in there with a pry tool. So what I do usually, oh, actually I did get in there with a pry tool. And then you can see I pulled the adhesive off. Sometimes I have to go, I'll improvise a little bit, but that time we got in there with the pry tool. Now with this one on the lens, you can actually open one of the gates here from the bottom, if you can see those. They flip upwards, and there are actually 2 that we have to disconnect. The one on the right hand side you can access with the pry tool. It's the one on the left hand side here where I'll usually go in with the flat blade because there's not a lot of room to get inside there. And just very gently, very carefully lift that up. And then we're going to go ahead and heat up the cable a little bit because there's some adhesive holding this into place. And then I would hold on to this old lens so that you can see how the flex cable is pre-bent or pre-folded in order to situate in here. Because when you go to put it back together, you have to be absolutely certain that your flex cable is folded properly. Otherwise, your lens will start to stick up over time right where that flex cable is. So I think I had to pull on that one a little bit. This is the old lens, so we're not too worried about this. That's pretty much it. Once you clean all the glass off of the frame, and you have to go over this very carefully, make sure you don't leave any broken glass behind, and also kind of go around the edge of this plastic bezel and make sure everything's intact. If it's mashed down, you'll have to replace it. Yeah, sorry, that's a pretty horrible picture there because of the lighting. So once it's cleaned up, we can go ahead and install the new lens.